They called me the family failure right to my face. 27 years old, wearing the same faded jeans I'd owned since college, driving a beat-up Honda while my cousins pulled up in their leased BMWs. What they didn't know was that I owned the building where we were having our family reunion. What they didn't know was that their precious trust funds were about to disappear. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning this moment for 3 years. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I turned being underestimated into my greatest weapon. It started when I was 12, sitting in my grandmother's tiny kitchen in East LA, watching her sort through bills with hands that shook from arthritis. Abuela Rosa had raised me after my parents died in a car crash, and she was the only person who ever believed I was destined for something bigger than our cramped apartment above the corner market. She would tell me stories while we made tamales every Sunday. Stories about her father, who'd built a small empire of restaurants in Mexico City before losing everything in the revolution. Stories about resilience, about playing the long game, about the power of being underestimated. Mija, she'd say, her voice soft but fierce, the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The truly powerful ones? They sit quietly and watch. They learn. They wait. I learned to wait. When Abuela died during my sophomore year of college, she left me 2 things, a worn leather journal filled with her business wisdom, and a small inheritance of $15,000. My relatives, the successful ones, the ones with medical degrees and law practices, they patted my head at the funeral and whispered about how I'd probably blow it all on something foolish. Instead, I invested every penny in a tiny tech startup that was developing inventory management software for small businesses. While my cousins were posting Instagram photos from their European vacations, I was sleeping on a friend's couch and learning everything I could about technology, business, and most importantly, patience. The software company grew slowly, quietly. We weren't flashy. We didn't chase venture capital or magazine covers. We just solved real problems for real people. Small restaurants, family-owned shops, immigrant businesses that reminded me of the corner market below Abuela's apartment. By 25, I owned 12% of a company worth $50 million. By 26, we'd been acquired by a tech giant for $200 million. My share? $24 million. But here's the thing about being underestimated: once people see you a certain way, they stop looking closely. They stop questioning. They assume. I kept driving my Honda. I kept wearing my simple clothes. I kept working as a junior developer at a small firm, never mentioning that I owned the firm. I kept living in my modest apartment, never mentioning that I owned the entire complex. My relatives saw what they expected to see: poor Elena, still struggling, still dreaming, still disappointing the family legacy. The Rodriguez family had money. Old money from my great-grandfather's construction business, carefully preserved and grown through 3 generations of doctors, lawyers, and real estate developers. Every year, we'd gather at the family estate in Palos Verdes for our reunion, and every year, I'd sit at the kids' table despite being nearly 30, listening to my successful cousins discuss their achievements while Uncle Marco made jokes about my computer hobby. This year felt different. The family was facing a crisis. Uncle Marco, the patriarch who'd inherited control of the family's assets, had made some questionable investments. The family's main property, a beautiful historic building in downtown LA that housed their offices and several rental units, was heavily mortgaged and facing foreclosure. The reunion was supposed to be a celebration, but it felt more like a wake. I arrived on a Friday afternoon in October, the Santa Ana winds whipping through the palm trees that lined the estate's driveway. The house loomed before me, all Spanish tile and wrought iron, a monument to the success I'd apparently never achieve. My cousin Jessica greeted me at the door, her smile bright and condescending. "Elena. So good to see you. How's the coding thing going? Still living in that cute little apartment?" "Still coding," I said, hugging her briefly. "Still in the same place." She nodded sympathetically. "Well, you know what they say about following your passion. Even if it doesn't pay the bills." The weekend unfolded predictably. Friday night dinner was a minefield of subtle digs and false encouragement. Cousin David talked about his new partnership at his law firm. Cousin Sophia showed off photos from her latest medical conference in Switzerland. Uncle Marco's son, Roberto, bragged about his real estate developments in Orange County. I sat quietly, picking at my food, letting them assume what they wanted to assume. "Elena, you're so quiet," Aunt Carmen observed, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Everything okay? I know things have been tough for you." "Just listening," I said. "Learning a lot." Uncle Marco laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Always the student, never the teacher, Elena? Maybe it's time to think about something more practical. Roberto could probably find you something in his office. Receptionist work, maybe?" The table went quiet for a moment, the cruelty of the suggestion hanging in the air. Then the conversation moved on, as it always did, leaving me to sit with the familiar sting of their dismissal. After dinner, I walked out to the garden where Abuela used to sit when she visited this house. There was a small fountain surrounded by jasmine, the same flowers she'd grown in coffee cans on our apartment's fire escape. I pulled out her leather journal and flipped through pages of wisdom written in her careful handwriting. "Patience is not passive waiting," she'd written. "It is active preparation for the right moment." The right moment was coming. I could feel it. Saturday morning brought news that made everyone's face tight with worry. The bank had accelerated the foreclosure timeline on the downtown building. They needed $2 million by Monday, or they'd lose the property that had been in our family for 40 years. "We'll have to sell," Uncle Marco announced during breakfast, his usual confidence cracked. "Maybe we can get enough to pay off the debt and save something for the family fund." "Who's going to buy it that quickly?" Roberto asked. "The market's terrible right now. There's a development company that's been circling," Uncle Marco said grimly. "They'll tear it down and build condos. They're offering $1.8 million. It's not enough to cover everything, but it's what we've got." I watched the family react. Jessica looked close to tears. She'd been planning to use her inheritance to expand her psychology practice. David was already on his phone, probably calling his financial advisor. Sophia sat frozen, staring at her coffee. "What about Elena?" Roberto asked suddenly, and everyone turned to look at me. "Doesn't she get a say in this? She's family too." Uncle Marco's laugh was bitter. "Elena doesn't have the resources to help with something like this. This is a conversation for the adults who actually contribute to the family's success." The words hit like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. Around the table, I saw a few uncomfortable expressions, but no one contradicted him. No one stood up for me. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll just listen." That afternoon, while the family held their crisis meetings in Uncle Marco's study, I took a walk through the neighborhood where I'd grown up visiting this house. The streets were lined with expensive cars and perfect lawns, symbols of the success that had always seemed just out of my reach. I thought about Abuela's stories, about her father who'd lost everything but never lost his dignity. About the importance of timing, of striking when your opponents least expect it. I made a phone call to my lawyer. Then another to my accountant. Then a third to a real estate agent I'd worked with before. Sunday morning, I woke up early and sat in the garden with my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The rest of the family was still sleeping, probably exhausted from their late-night strategizing sessions. At 10 o'clock, Uncle Marco called everyone to the living room for what he called the final family meeting. The mood was somber, defeated. These people who'd spent their lives accumulating wealth and status were facing the possibility of losing the symbol of their success. "I've spoken with the development company," Uncle Marco began. "They're willing to close quickly, but they want to reduce their offer to $1.6 million. It's not enough to cover the debt, but it's better than letting it go to foreclosure." "How much will we lose?" Jessica asked, her voice small. "The family fund will be depleted," Uncle Marco admitted. "Your inheritances, they'll be gone." "I'm sorry. I failed you all." The room was silent except for the sound of Sophia crying softly. These people who'd spent years looking down on me were now facing the loss of everything they'd used to define their worth. Roberto cleared his throat. Maybe we should consider other options. Alternative buyers. Who's going to pay more than a development company? David asked bitterly. They're the only ones with that kind of cash to move quickly. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn to me. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I'll buy it. The silence that followed was complete. Uncle Marco blinked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Elena, he said carefully, this is a serious conversation about millions of dollars. This isn't the time for jokes. I'm not joking, I said. I'll buy the building. 2.2 million. Cash. We can close tomorrow. Roberto started to laugh, but it died in his throat when he saw my expression. Elena, that's not possible. You don't have that kind of money. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cashier's check, already made out to the family trust. $2.2 million. I set it on the coffee table in front of Uncle Marco. The room exploded into chaos. Everyone started talking at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. Uncle Marco picked up the check with trembling hands, examining it like it might disappear. This is real, he whispered. How? Jessica demanded. How do you have this money? I looked around the room at their shocked faces, at the people who'd spent years treating me like a failure, like someone to be pitted and dismissed. Remember that computer hobby you all thought was so cute? I said. Turns out it was worth something after all. I told them about the software company, about the acquisition, about the investments I'd made with my share of the profits. I told them about the real estate portfolio I'd quietly built, about the tech startups I'd funded, about the wealth I'd accumulated while they were busy looking down on me. You're saying you're a millionaire? Roberto asked, his voice hollow. Multimillionaire, I corrected. But who's counting? The questions came in a flood. Why had I hidden it? Why had I let them think I was struggling? Why had I endured their condescension and pity? Because I learned something important from Abuela, I said. The most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's watching. You all assumed I was harmless, irrelevant. You stopped paying attention to what I was actually doing. Uncle Marco was staring at the check like it held the secrets of the universe. Why? He asked finally. Why would you help us after how we've treated you? It was a good question. Part of me wanted to let them lose everything, to walk away and let them face the consequences of their arrogance. But that wasn't what Abuela would have wanted. Because family is family, I said. Even when family forgets what that means. But I wasn't finished. However, I continued, I'm not just buying the building to save your inheritances. I'm buying it because I want it. I've had my eye on that property for 2 years. It's going to be the headquarters for my new foundation. I explained my plans. The Rodriguez Foundation for Small Business Development, focused on helping immigrant entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses access capital and mentorship. The building would house our offices, along with co-working spaces for the businesses we supported. You're naming it after the family? Sophia asked, confused. I'm naming it after Abuela, I said. Rosa Rodriguez believed in the power of quiet determination. She believed in helping others without expecting recognition. She believed that true success isn't about what you accumulate, but what you give back. The room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Thoughtful. Ashamed. You could have told us, Jessica said finally. You could have let us know you were successful. Would it have changed anything? I asked. Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I had money? The honest answer was written on their faces. Yes, they would have treated me differently. They would have courted my favor, sought my approval, included me in their conversations about success and achievement. But it would have been because of my wealth, not because of who I was as a person. I needed to know who you really were, I continued. I needed to understand what this family valued. Whether you cared about me, or just about what I could do for you. Uncle Marco was still holding the check, his hands shaking slightly. Elena, I owe you an apology. We all do. The things we said, the way we treated you. You treated me exactly how you see the world, I said. Through the lens of money and status. You judged my worth by my bank account and my job title. You never bothered to look deeper. I walked over to the window that overlooked the garden where I'd spent so many moments with Abuela. The jasmine was in bloom, filling the air with the same sweet scent I remembered from childhood. I'm not angry, I said, and I realized it was true. I'm disappointed. But I'm not angry. You gave me something valuable, actually. You taught me that success without character is meaningless. That wealth without wisdom is just numbers on a page. The rest of the day passed in a blur of awkward conversations and stilted apologies. My relatives seemed to be recalibrating their entire understanding of me, of themselves, of what had just happened. Some of them were genuinely remorseful. Others were clearly calculating how this revelation might benefit them. Roberto cornered me before dinner, his salesman's smile back in place. Elena, I had no idea you were so accomplished. Maybe we could discuss some investment opportunities? I've got some great projects that could use backing from someone with your vision. I smiled back, but it was Abuela's smile, polite, patient, and completely unmoved. I'll consider it, Roberto. Send me a business plan. He wouldn't, of course. He'd never had to work for anything in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Jessica approached me more carefully, her psychology training apparently kicking in. I keep thinking about what you said, about us treating you differently if we'd known about your success. That's really troubling. I need to examine my own biases. I appreciated her honesty, even if it was coming years too late. The evening meal was subdued, everyone still processing the day's revelations. Uncle Marco raised a toast to family, to second chances, to forgiveness. I raised my glass, but I was thinking about Abuela, about the lessons she'd taught me about patience and timing. Monday morning, I met Uncle Marco at the bank to finalize the sale. The transaction was smooth, professional, surreal. With the stroke of a pen, I became the owner of a building that had once seemed as unattainable as the moon. Elena, Uncle Marco said as we walked out of the bank together, I want you to know that I respect what you've accomplished. What you've built. I was wrong to dismiss you. Thank you, I said. But respect given only after someone proves their worth isn't really respect. It's just fear of missing out. He nodded slowly, understanding the deeper truth of what I was saying. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I hired architects to renovate the building, preserving its historic character while modernizing it for its new purpose. I assembled a team of program directors, financial advisors, and mentors. I reached out to community organizations, immigrant rights groups, and small business associations. The Rodriguez Foundation launched 6 months later with a celebration that made the local news. The building gleamed with fresh paint and new purpose, its lobby filled with entrepreneurs, community leaders, and local politicians. My family attended, of course, though their presence felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. During my speech that evening, I talked about Abuela's influence, about the power of quiet determination, about the importance of lifting others as you climb. I didn't mention the years of condescension, the dismissive comments, the way my own family had written me off as a failure. I didn't need to. The success spoke for itself. But the most meaningful moment came later, when I was alone in my new office, looking out at the city lights. I'd hung Abuela's leather journal in a frame on the wall, open to a page where she'd written, "True wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you create for others." I thought about the businesses we'd already started helping, the entrepreneurs who reminded me of younger versions of myself and Abuela. People who'd been underestimated, dismissed, counted out. People who needed someone to believe in them, to give them a chance, to see their potential when others saw only their limitations. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Saw the news coverage. You looked beautiful up there. Proud to be your cousin. I smiled, but I didn't respond immediately. Some relationships could be rebuilt, but they had to be built on new foundations. Foundations of genuine respect, not just impressed acknowledgement of success. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. Maria, one of our first grant recipients, peeked in with a shy smile. She was a woman in her 50s who'd come to the U.S. from El Salvador 30 years ago and had been trying to expand her catering business for a decade. Miss Elena, she said in accented English, I wanted to thank you again. The loan, the mentorship, the co-working space, it's changing everything for my family. You're changing everything for your family, I corrected gently. I just provided some tools. She nodded, but her eyes were bright with tears. My daughter starts college next year. Business school. She says she wants to be like you someday. After Maria left, I sat in the quiet of my office, surrounded by the symbols of success I'd never thought I'd wanted. The expensive furniture, the awards on the wall, the view of the city I'd conquered. But what filled me with the deepest satisfaction wasn't the wealth or the recognition. It was the knowledge that I'd used my success to honor Abuela's memory, to extend the chain of opportunity she'd started when she believed in a grieving 12-year-old girl with big dreams and small resources. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had spent years trying to teach me about success, about achievement, about what mattered in life. They'd used their own accomplishments as measuring sticks, their own values as benchmarks. But the greatest lesson I'd learned hadn't come from them at all. It had come from a woman who'd lost everything and rebuilt it quietly, who'd raised a granddaughter with love and wisdom, who'd shown me that the most powerful victories are often the ones nobody sees coming. 6 months after the foundation's launch, I received an invitation to Uncle Marco's 70th birthday party. The event was being held at the same country club where I'd endured years of condescending conversations at family gatherings. I almost didn't go. The old Elena, the one who'd sat quietly while relatives made jokes about her computer hobby, might have found an excuse to stay away. But the new Elena, the one who owned buildings and funded dreams, had learned something important about facing the past. The party was exactly what I expected, elegant, expensive, and full of people eager to network and impress each other. But something had changed in how people looked at me. Word of my success had spread through the extended family and their social circles. I was no longer the disappointing cousin who coded for fun. I was Elena Rodriguez, philanthropist and entrepreneur. The transformation was both gratifying and nauseating. Distant relatives who'd never bothered to learn my name suddenly wanted to discuss their business ideas. Family friends who'd politely ignored me for years were now eager to introduce me to their children, their partners, their investment opportunities. Elena. Roberto appeared at my elbow, his smile wider than ever. I've been meaning to call you. I've got this amazing development project in Irvine that would be perfect for your foundation. Very community-focused, very socially conscious. I accepted the business card he pressed into my hand, knowing I'd throw it away later. Roberto hadn't changed. He was still the same person who'd suggested I work as his receptionist. The only difference was that now he saw me as useful. The evening's program included a speech from Uncle Marco, reflecting on family, legacy, and the importance of supporting each other through life's challenges. He talked about the recent crisis that had threatened the family's assets, and how they'd found an unexpected solution from an unexpected source. Sometimes, he said, looking directly at me, wisdom and strength come from the places we least expect. I'm grateful for the reminder that family means supporting each other, not just during good times, but especially during difficult ones. The applause was polite, but I caught the undercurrent of discomfort. Everyone knew the story by now, knew how the family failure had become the family savior. It was a narrative that made them uncomfortable, because it forced them to confront their own assumptions and biases. After the dinner, I found myself on the club's terrace, looking out at the manicured golf course under the stars. The Santa Ana winds were blowing again, carrying the scent of jasmine from the landscaping. Jessica joined me, holding 2 glasses of wine. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about Abuela, I said, accepting the glass. She would have loved this view. She would have been proud of you, Jessica said quietly. What you've accomplished, what you're doing with the foundation, it's incredible. Thank you. We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Finally, Jessica spoke again. Can I ask you something? Do you think you'll ever forgive us? Really forgive us? It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with for months. The hurt was still there, probably always would be. Years of dismissal and condescension don't disappear overnight, no matter how dramatically the tables turn. I think forgiveness is less about forgetting what happened and more about choosing not to let it define the future, I said finally. I can't change how you treated me, but I can choose how I respond to who you are now. Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. I've been thinking a lot about that day at the reunion. About the things Uncle Marco said, about how none of us stood up for you. I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of myself. Good, I said, and she looked surprised. Shame can be useful if it motivates change. The question is what you do with it now. Over the following weeks, I watched my family members grapple with the new reality. Some of them, like Jessica, seemed genuinely committed to examining their own biases and building better relationships. Others, like Roberto, were clearly just recalibrating their approach to what they saw as a new opportunity. But the most interesting response came from Uncle Marco himself. 3 weeks after his birthday party, he called and asked if he could visit the foundation. Not for a photo opportunity or a networking event, but just to see what we were doing. He spent the afternoon touring our facilities, meeting with our staff, talking to the entrepreneurs we were supporting. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of the condescension I'd grown so accustomed to. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen from him before, genuine curiosity. This is remarkable, he said as we concluded the tour in my office. The scope of what you're doing, the impact you're having, it's exactly what this community needs. Thank you. He was quiet for a moment, studying the framed photo of Abuela that sat on my desk. I never really knew her, you know. Rosa. I mean, I knew she was your grandmother, but I never took the time to understand who she was, what she meant to you. She was everything to me, I said simply. I can see that now. I can see her influence in what you've built here. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Elena, I want to apologize. Not just for what I said at the reunion, but for years of not seeing you. Not really seeing you. I waited, letting him find his words. I built my identity around being the successful one, the provider, the patriarch. Having you succeed so dramatically, so quietly, it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. About what I value, about how I measure worth. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I don't expect your forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better. To see people more clearly. To understand that success comes in many forms. Success is just a word, I said. What matters is what you do with whatever you achieve. He nodded slowly. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. As the first anniversary of the foundation approached, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The scared 12-year-old who'd lost her parents. The determined college student who'd invested her grandmother's inheritance in a risky startup. The woman who'd endured years of family dismissal while quietly building an empire. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Business magazines wanted to profile the secret millionaire who'd saved her family's legacy. Tech publications were interested in the behind-the-scenes story of one of the most successful startup acquisitions in recent memory. Philanthropic organizations wanted to highlight the innovative approach we were taking to small business development. I gave a few interviews, but I tried to keep the focus on the foundation's work rather than my personal story. The narrative of the underestimated cousin who shocked her family with hidden wealth was compelling, but it wasn't the story I wanted to tell. The story I wanted to tell was about Maria, who'd used our microloan to expand her catering business and was now employing 12 people. About James, the immigrant mechanic who'd leveraged our mentorship program to open 2 new locations. About Sarah, the single mother who'd turned her home-based bakery into a thriving online business with our help. These were the victories that mattered. These were the successes that honored Abuela's memory. The anniversary celebration was held in the building's main hall, the same space where my great-grandfather's construction company had once operated. The walls were lined with photos of the businesses we'd supported, the entrepreneurs we'd mentored, the dreams we'd helped make real. My family attended, of course, though their presence felt different now. Less obligatory, more genuine. Jessica had started volunteering with our financial literacy program. David was providing pro bono legal services to some of our grant recipients. Even Roberto had surprised me by referring several legitimate business opportunities our way. Uncle Marco gave a brief speech about the importance of family legacy, about how the building had found new purpose while honoring its history. He talked about learning to see success in new ways, about the importance of lifting others up rather than just climbing higher yourself. But the moment that meant the most to me came when Maria took the microphone to talk about her experience with the foundation. She spoke in her careful English about coming to America with nothing, about working multiple jobs to support her family, about the dreams she'd carried but never thought she could achieve. Miss Elena and her team, Maria said, tears in her eyes, they didn't just give me money. They gave me belief. They saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. I thought about Abuela, about the 12-year-old girl she'd believed in when everyone else saw only tragedy and loss. About the chain of belief that had led from her small apartment to this moment. After the celebration, I walked through the empty building, my footsteps echoing in the halls that had once intimidated me so much. The offices were dark, but the streetlights outside cast long shadows through the windows, creating patterns of light and darkness that seemed to dance across the walls. I made my way to the small conference room we'd designated as a memorial space for Abuela. Her portrait hung on the wall, surrounded by photos of the businesses we'd supported and quotes from the entrepreneurs we'd helped. Her leather journal was displayed in a place of honor, open to her words about true wealth being what you create for others. I sat in the quiet room, thinking about the strange mathematics of success. How being underestimated had become my advantage. How years of dismissal had taught me the value of substance over appearance. How the pain of being overlooked had motivated me to make sure others wouldn't be. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Rodriguez, my name is Carmen Gutierrez. I heard about your foundation from my friend Maria. I have a small business idea but no one believes it will work. Could I maybe talk to you sometime? I smiled, already composing my response. Another dreamer, another person who'd been counted out, another opportunity to extend the chain of belief that Abuela had started. Of course, I typed back. Let's schedule a meeting. I'd love to hear about your idea. Because that's what this was all about. Not the money, not the recognition, not even the satisfaction of proving my family wrong. It was about seeing potential where others saw problems, about believing in people who'd been taught not to believe in themselves. It was about understanding that the most powerful victories aren't always the loudest ones. 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Roberto was getting married, and the engagement announcement in the society pages mentioned that the reception would be held at the historic Rodriguez building, headquarters of the Rodriguez Foundation. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to associate himself with success that wasn't his own. Some things never change. But other things do. Jessica had started her own nonprofit, focusing on mental health services for immigrant families. David was considering leaving his high-paying firm to work in public interest law. Uncle Marco had begun mentoring young entrepreneurs, sharing the business wisdom he'd accumulated over decades of success. My family was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that success without purpose is just accumulation. That wealth without wisdom is just numbers. That the truest victories are often the quietest ones. As I write this, sitting in my office overlooking the city where I grew up, I think about the woman I've become and the girl I used to be. The scared 12-year-old who lost everything. The determined young adult who invested in her future. The patient strategist who waited for the right moment to reveal her strength. They're all the same person, connected by the thread of Abuela's wisdom and the power of being underestimated. The foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined when I first wrote that check to save my family's building. We've supported over 200 businesses, provided mentorship to thousands of entrepreneurs, and created a model that's being replicated in cities across the country. But the success I'm most proud of isn't measured in dollars or headlines. It's measured in the confidence of a woman who thought she was too old to start over. In the ambition of a teenager who's the first in his family to dream of college. In the determination of a single father who's building something better for his children. These are the victories that matter. These are the successes that last. And they all started with a grandmother who believed in the power of quiet strength, who taught her granddaughter that the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's watching. I keep Abuela's journal on my desk now, not hidden away but displayed proudly. Sometimes visitors ask about it, and I tell them about the woman who raised me, who believed in me, who taught me that true success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right. Her words guide me still. The loudest person in the room is usually the weakest. The truly powerful ones? They sit quietly and watch. They learn. They wait. I learned to wait. I learned to watch. I learned to turn being underestimated into my greatest strength. And now, I'm teaching others to do the same. The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. Another entrepreneur, another dreamer, another person who's been told their ideas won't work. I answer with a smile, ready to listen, ready to believe, ready to extend the chain of opportunity that began in a small apartment above a corner market in East LA. Because this is what I've learned, the most powerful victories aren't about defeating others. They're about lifting them up. They're about creating space for dreams that others can't see. They're about understanding that success shared is success multiplied. They're about remembering that sometimes the greatest triumph is not in proving you were right, but in using your platform to help others prove themselves. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed or overlooked or counted out, I want you to know something: your moment is coming. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's coming. Use that time to prepare. Use that time to build. Use that time to become so undeniably successful that when you finally reveal your strength, the world has no choice but to listen. And when that moment comes, remember what Abuela taught me: true power isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Subscribe if this story moved you, and share your own experiences in the comments below.